The magic meta is about... Dude, what the hell? I am so sunburnt. I've just had a look. I'm sorry. I've only just looked at the camera and seen how red I am. I look like goddamn Rudolph, dude. Okay, well, I'm getting this out because I've got some decks to brew. Day one for Aether Drift that I think could be pretty great decks to play. And sunburn or not, I will do it. So, here's 3 decks that I think will be really good on day one standard from a variety of different playstyles. So hopefully there's something in there for you. Let's dive in. Oh no, f that. Don't do the let's dive in, Cade. Cut that out. Let's just go. All right, let's start. Our first deck is going to be Izzet Monument to Endurance. This is a deck I'm very excited to brew about. If you saw my previews for the new spoilers, I was very keen on Monument to Endurance, which fittingly is the centerpiece of this deck. So as a reminder, Monument to Endurance, whenever you discard a card, you'll choose one of 3 benefits. The point of this deck is to control the board early, get your Monument to Endurances out, and then repeatedly discard cards and trigger its effect. Since you have each opponent loses 3 life as one of the options, you can effectively attrition your opponent out of the game so long as you have ways to keep discarding. How do we do that? Well, we have Artist's Talent. This is a red Bloomburrow talent that effectively lets you draw and discard every time you cast a non-creature spell. Our goal here will be to use instants to remove creatures, discard a card, trigger Monument to Endurance, hopefully multiple of them, and drain out our opponent. We've got a few cheeky tricks to keep us alive. We have This Town Ain't Big Enough and Storm Chaser's Talent, which is a very, very powerful 2-card combo that's absolutely rocking standard at the moment. This deck can comfortably run it. As a secondary target to This Town Ain't Big Enough, we've also got Roaring Furnace and Steaming Sauna, which can be bounced back with this town as a removal spell, which I think gives the deck a little bit of extra longevity that it needs. Torch the Tower cleans up all those annoying mice and problematic 1-drops. Interestingly, and perhaps probably the most broken interaction in this deck, we have Monument to Endurance on 3, followed by Ill-Timed Explosion. You might recall that Up the Beanstalk plus Sunfall being a particularly powerful combo that board wipes and also draws a player a card. The same thing with Sunfall and Caretaker's Talent. I think Monument to Endurance and Ill-Timed Explosion joins that quite illustrious pair of cards, as not only can you draw a card, courtesy of Monument to Endurance, you are discarding 2. You can also make yourself a treasure token if you need to ramp, or simply make them lose 3 life and progress your game plan. This only gets more disgusting as you get more Monument to Endurances on the board, since every one of them can trigger one of these effects. So if you have 4 Monument to Endurances out, you can basically deal 12 damage to someone for each card you discard. Kiora is in here as a way to draw 2, discard 2. She also pairs very nicely with a card like Bitter Reunion, a card that lets you discard and draw 2. If you can play her on turn 4 with Threshold achieved, sacrifice Bitter Reunion and attack with her, you can immediately make the 8/8 Scion of the Deep, which can be very difficult for some decks to deal with. The land base is pretty generic, not much to really say about there. Fabled Passage is in here as a way to not only help Kiora get her Threshold target, but also trigger Brass's Tunnel Grinder, which is a really good ramp spell in this deck. The Discover effect is also a benefit. Often decks have to address this card. You can get an insane value over time if this artifact's allowed to turn into a land. In the sideboard, we have pretty generic responses to a lot of different threats. If they are bullying your Monument to Endurance, as in trying to remove it consistently, you have a few tricks. 3 Steps Ahead pairs incredibly well with Monument. You can counter a spell trying to destroy the Monument. Later on in the game, you can copy the Monument with 3 Steps Ahead, and it also draws cards and discard cards. This card is perfect with it. Tishana's Tidebinder and Jace are here to help you beat Domain and various other control-based decks. Being in blue, I think, yeah, you can absolutely take advantage of that. Ghost Vacuum helps you hate out the graveyard strategies. Brotherhood's End is a board wipe that I think will be very important for dealing with wide strategies, but also hits a lot of artifact-related decks, which I think will be popping up soon. I think Simulacrum Synthesizer might be back, and Brotherhood's End is a very effective way to remove it. Obviously, it does have some anti-synergy because it hits your own monument, but again, I think in the matchups where it matters, I think destroying Simulacrum Synthesizer's game plan is much more relevant. A Braid, equally important, single target removal and artifact hate. One more spicy card I've included in the deck as a one-of is Season of Weaving. I wish I could include more copies of this card. I'm a bit skeptical on being able to do that. Season of Weaving has some really good modes that let you copy artifacts, so you can copy Monument to Endurance. You can also use it as a pseudo board wipe, returning all tokens to your hand, or each owner's hand. I just think the meta might be too fast to run more than one copy of this. And again, I could potentially shuffle things around if things slow down, but yeah, Season of Weaving, a card I really wanted to include. Our next deck we're going to talk about is what I call Speed Viper. This is an Orzhov Start Your Engines deck. Speed Viper because it, in the sideboard, completely switches its game plan. So, to start, you're playing a 24 creature card deck with Raise the Past. Now, you might have seen this card before in Orzhov lists that like to fill their graveyard with 1 and 2 drops. I'm thinking of Elisil Core, Vampire Brute, Blood Witch, cards that when creatures die, they ping your opponent. We're following a very similar game plan here. However, we're going to be using Start Your Engines mechanics to get Embalmed Ascendant up to max, as well as Zahir Glory's Past to effectively create these really difficult to deal with boards. Snarling Gorehound is a really critical 1-drop in this deck because not only does it have Menace, meaning if you get Start Your Engines going, it's difficult to block, it also lets you surveil off each of these creatures that enter the battlefield, meaning you can fill up your grave really quickly for Raise the Past. The game plan is very straightforward. Eaten Alive and Momentum Breaker are very efficient removal spells designed to promote your game plan while also letting you develop a threat. The mana base, fairly similar. It's the sideboard where things get very spicy. I believe this deck can have 2 game plans, basically, depending on what it's playing against, which is why I'm very excited about this. So as I said, game 1, you're going to come out swinging with filling your graveyard and reanimating it for a big alpha strike, but let's say your opponent, knowing what you're doing, is now running Graveyard Hate. Well, this is where you switch it up. You're going to be putting 3 copies of Rottenmouth Viper in your deck at minimum. The reason being is you can sacrifice all these little 1/1s or 1/2s to get the Viper out quickly. Ideally, you bring it out and immediately give it haste with Amonkhet Raceway. Now, Rottenmouth Viper says when it enters and attacks, you get blight counters, meaning that if you can give this haste on the turn you play it, you can swing with a 6/6 and force your opponent to deal with 3 blight counters worth of triggers. This, a lot of the time, be absolutely backbreaking. If a control deck is tapped out or doesn't have a removal spell, this could absolutely send them for a spin. You've got Liliana of the Veil here as well to deal with the control matchup. If they run Rest in Peace specifically, as a very spicy tech, Ketramos, the New Dawn, could absolutely come online as soon as you play him. He's indestructible, meaning that your opponent will be forced to expend some pretty valuable removal to even get him off the board if they can. And yeah, if your graveyard has been Rest in Peace, you just slap down Ketramos and you have a 4/4 indestructible that can attack because of the creatures are in exile. Ghost Vacuum, once again, here to deal with Oculus and various other Reanimator decks. Cut Down is here to even out really aggressive matchups. If you're against a red deck, say, that gets a 3/3 or something that your creatures can't get past, you can cut it down before it gets buffed. A lot of those decks like to buff their mice, so Cut Down is your answer to that. Duress is here as your control breaker as well. You're going to be Duressing out Sunfalls and various other obnoxious pieces of removal. But yeah, the deck's very straightforward in how it plays. Ideally, it's going to be playing very fast, but has a really resilient backup plan, I think, in Rottenmouth Viper that will really take advantage of Amonkhet Raceway. Definitely the premier Start Your Engines deck in my mind. There is a Rakdos list I've been brewing that I might share later, but compared to that, I felt that this was far and beyond the best way to start your engine. And our last deck today is a very ambitious one. This is Temur Exhaust. So we've seen Temur in the past utilize the Otter package to be able to basically one-shot you with Song of Tottenaz, the one that summons all the rats. Pretty powerful deck in the right hands, very complex to pilot. This is effectively taking the theory that we can play Temur, putting the new Verge lands in, and taking advantage of Exhaust. So, at a high level, the crux of this deck is you're going to want to fill your graveyard with Afterburner Expert and use Draconotics Engineer to haste them in. Now, you don't have to rush to fill your graveyard. You'll notice there's not too much mill in this deck. This is more of a, I'm playing valuable creatures, removing the threat, and I have the inevitability of just bringing out these 4/2s with haste that can absolutely just smack you down. Loot is here as a really powerful value engine, which is part of the reason why we go into Temur. Bushwhack is a removal / color fixing card so that we can hit all 3 colors. You'll see here we also have Storm Chaser's talent, and this town ain't big enough in the deck. Again, this is just a very resilient, powerful value loot that we can just do if we don't have cards to play with. Torch the Tower is here as a simple way to help prevent aggro. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is a card I've included in here as a card I would potentially cut. It may not be needed in a deck like this, but it's a way to give all creatures in play, so I'm thinking mainly your little 1/1 otters, the ability to use exhaust abilities. Boommobile might be a surprise to some, but I believe this card can function as a powerful removal tool in the right conditions. And what are those conditions? Well, if we look at the sideboard down here, we have 3 copies of Training Grounds in the deck. Now, this isn't in the main board, simply because it doesn't really do enough against the aggressive matchups in my mind. Now, you might be able to find a way to make that work. However, I think as a safer option, leaving it in the sideboard and bringing it in the right matchup will probably be the play. Now, what is that right matchup? Well, Training Training Grounds reduces the cost of activated abilities by 2. Boommobile is an X spell, effectively meaning for every Training Grounds I have in play, Boommobile can do 2 extra damage to a target. You might see where I'm going with this. I'm talking about using Boommobile to deal 10 plus 10 plus 10 damage constantly to my opponent in the late game. I don't think control players can really deal with that. You also are able to bounce Boommobile with This Town Ain't Big Enough and do it all again if they feel like they can try and gain life and out-survive you. I think there's definitely a world here where that works. Dredge's Insight is a really unexpected card. I didn't think I would include in a list like that, but on inspection, it's a really efficient milling spell that gives you life. We have a lot of ways to recur things out of the graveyard. Stormchaser's Talent. We have Afterburner Expert. I think there's going to be a world where this card gives you enough life to help force you or navigate you through the aggro matchups. We also have a few sideboard tools here that I've talked about, some of these, such as Brotherhood's End, another copy of Torch the Tower. These are designed to just stabilize against aggro. Another loot is here for if you have a slow matchup and need to deal with it. Negate, again, anti-control, designed to handle Jace the Perfected Minds and various other threats to your deck. Sub-Sunan is a card I'm going to experiment with in this list for a similar reason, where it's a indestructible god that might be hard to interact with. It may not make the final cut, but I think it's absolutely something worth trying. That was 3 decks you can be trying on day 1. These all get my stamp of approval as decks to try, and you're absolutely able to tweak them as you see fit. Don't feel like you're beholden to these. I do think Temur Exhaust, out of all of these, is going to be the one that needs the most tweaking here. This is a first attempt at it. I've been thinking about this one for the past few days. It will be something you have to play to really get a feel for. I think there's a lot of potential in this one in particular. Izzet, I do think, has a pretty powerful deck as well. And the Orzhov list, I think, will just absolutely crush fools in Arena. But yeah, I'll be putting a link to all of these decks in Moxfield in the comments, so absolutely check them out if you're interested. I'll be keen to hear your thoughts on them, or if you have any suggestions. Maybe I've missed a card that you reckon would be great in a deck like this. But yeah, that's really about it. I'll see you guys on the ladder in Aether Drift. Cheers.